picture this, it's a perfect summer day, the kind, like those hazy summer days where kids are running around barefoot, the air smells like fresh cut grass, and everybody knows everyone else's name. That was Chisholm, Minnesota. It seemed like a town where life just moved slower, gentler. Until June 14th, 2003, when 5-year-old Lyanna Warner disappeared, just 2 blocks from home.
Wow.
And today we're diving deep into Lyanna's case, a story that really captivated the nation and left investigators baffled for years. We've got news reports, court documents, and even some first-hand accounts to unpack, so...
You know, what really strikes me about this case is that it happened in this seemingly idyllic small town. Chisholm only had about 5,000 people, and it was the kind of place where kids could just roam free, where danger just felt so far away. And then suddenly, Lyanna's disappearance just rips through that sense of security.
Yeah, you really get that sense of small-town innocence when you read through the sources. Lyanna, they called her Beaner, was just a typical 5-year-old. Full of life, always barefoot, loved playing with the neighbor kids. Everybody just adored her.
Right. It's what makes it all the more chilling. How could someone just vanish from a place where everyone knows everyone else?
It's like a nightmare no parent would ever want to imagine. And the sources lay out the events leading up to Lyanna's disappearance in such detail. It was just a normal summer afternoon. Lyanna asked her mom if she could visit the Quirk family, who lived just a few houses down. Her mom, thinking it was safe, said, "Sure, go ahead."
And that sense of normalcy, just trusting your surroundings, that's something that I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to, especially if they grew up in a similar kind of town. It's that shattering of that belief, the sudden feeling of vulnerability that makes this case so disturbing.
Absolutely. And about 45 minutes later, Lyanna was seen knocking on the Quirk's door. They were out of town. That was the last time anyone saw her. Can you imagine the panic when she didn't come home?
It's unimaginable.
The search that followed was massive. Family, friends, neighbors, police, firefighters, they even brought in scent dogs. The whole town was looking for Lyanna.
I mean, you really see the community coming together in those initial search efforts, driven by that hope and determination that they were going to find her. But as the hours turn into days and the days into weeks, you can just feel that hope starting to fade and that dread starts to set in.
And the sources describe how the investigation shifted from a rescue mission to a recovery effort. Unfortunately, law enforcement, they went through every inch of the Warner home. They interviewed so many people, and they followed up on every lead, no matter how small it seemed.
It's incredible the scope of this investigation. They were leaving no stone unturned. They were searching nearby fields, wooded areas. They even drained a lake. They looked into a group of bikers who were in town for some kind of motorcycle event.
Yeah, it was extensive. And as the investigation went on, a few people became persons of interest. One of them was Matthew James Curtis, a neighbor who lived just a few houses away from the Warners.
Interesting.
And a few months after Lyanna disappeared, Curtis was arrested, but not for anything related to Lyanna. He was arrested for child sexual abuse.
Oh, wow. This is where the case really takes a dark turn. The fact that they found child sexual abuse material in his possession, it immediately raises suspicions. Could he have been involved in Lyanna's disappearance? The timing and the nature of his crimes just made him a focus of the investigation.
Right. And you have to imagine that pressure on him, knowing that a whole town was looking for answers. And tragically, before his trial, Curtis committed suicide.
It's not an admission of guilt, but it certainly casts a shadow over everything.
It really does. And then there's Bruce William Christensen. This was a local guy with a criminal record who, while he was in prison on unrelated charges, confessed to Lyanna's abduction and murder.
Wow, that must have been a huge development for the investigators at the time. Did it lead anywhere?
Well, initially it seemed like a glimmer of hope. Could this finally be the break they'd been waiting for? But as investigators looked into his claims, they started to realize his confession was a cruel hoax. Yeah, he led authorities on a wild goose chase, said he buried Lyanna in this specific spot. But when they went to dig there, all they found was a cat grave.
Ah, how awful. It turned out he had made up the whole story just to get out of prison for a little bit.
Exactly. It was devastating for Lyanna's family and for the investigators who had put so much into the case. And it just shows you the challenges they faced, sorting through all the false leads and misinformation, and the emotional toll that this kind of case can take on everyone.
It's really hard to comprehend what would motivate someone to do something like that, to give people false hope and then just rip it away. Yeah. It's just a reminder of the darker side of human nature.
Yeah. And throughout all of this, you have the Warners trying to cope with the loss of their daughter, the media constantly hounding them, and the just agonizing not knowing what happened to Lyanna.
Absolutely. The ripple effects of these kinds of tragedies are huge. It goes way beyond just the immediate family. It affects friends, neighbors, and entire community.
One of the sources mentioned that Kane, Lyanna's mother, was even arrested for allegedly trying to run over Chris, Lyanna's father, with her car. She later ended up pleading guilty to a lesser charge. But it just gives you a glimpse into the immense pressure and turmoil they must have been going through.
It really shows how grief can manifest in these unexpected and sometimes destructive ways. It's hard to even imagine the level of pain they were dealing with.
And then just when it seemed like every lid had gone cold, there was a new development. The arrest of Joseph Duncan, a serial killer in Idaho, suddenly brought a wave of new attention to the case.
I remember hearing about Joseph Duncan. His crimes were horrific. So was there a connection to Lyanna's case?
Well, Duncan had an online blog, and in it he actually mentioned the missing girl from Chisholm. So for a while, investigators thought maybe Lyanna had become one of his victims.
I can see why they would think that. It must have been a roller coaster of emotions for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. But as they dug deeper into Duncan's movements and his crimes, they were able to rule him out as a suspect.
Another dead end, unfortunately. But it sounds like the Chisholm Police Department never gave up on this case.
They didn't. They never let it fade from memory. And that dedication led to something really interesting. Years later, a young woman actually contacted the police because she thought she might be Lyanna.
Wow. Really? That just shows that even in cases like this, there's always a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, it was an incredible twist. But unfortunately, after DNA testing, it turned out she wasn't Lyanna.
Oh, that's too bad. But the fact that she came forward at all speaks volumes about the enduring power of hope. And it's a reminder that Lyanna's story still resonates with people. They still want to know what happened to her.
It's a case that really sticks with you. A puzzle with so many missing pieces. A community holding on to hope, and a family that deserves answers. And we'll be back after a short break to delve deeper into the complexities of this captivating case.
So before the break, we were talking about all those leads and the different suspects in Lyanna's case. It's just this tangled web of possibilities, and each one seemed like it could be the answer. But they all just led to dead ends. It really makes you think about how hard these investigations can be, especially when there isn't a lot of physical evidence to go on.
Yeah, going through all the sources, I was amazed by just how much information investigators had to go through. Witness statements, possible sightings, tips from the public. It must have been like putting together a puzzle, but with half the pieces missing.
And the pressure to find some kind of answer must have been incredible, right? With a whole community hoping for the best, a family needing closure, and then the whole country watching everything they do.
Oh, absolutely. And you can't forget about the media either. Chisholm was a small town, and all of a sudden they have news crews from all over the place showing up wanting updates.
Yeah.
Had to be overwhelming.
It's a tricky thing, the media's role in these cases. On one hand, they can keep these cases in the public eye and maybe even help generate new leads and keep the pressure on. But on the other hand, they can cause a lot of speculation and spread misinformation and sometimes even hurt the investigation by creating false leads or messing with evidence.
One thing that really stood out to me was how thorough that initial search was. I mean, they searched the Warner home multiple times, drained a lake, interviewed so many people. They were serious about covering all their bases.
It shows how dedicated they were. But it also shows how difficult it was, right? Without any solid evidence pointing them in the right direction, they had to cast a wide net and basically chase down every possibility, even the ones that didn't seem likely.
And then think about the emotional toll it must have taken on everyone involved. Can you imagine being one of the officers working on this case every single day, knowing that a little girl's life is at stake?
Yeah, people don't always think about that psychological burden on law enforcement in cases like this. I mean, they're dealing with the worst of humanity, facing all these horrible scenarios, and trying to stay objective while still feeling for the victims and their families.
And then you have the Warners, dealing with every parent's worst nightmare. Not only did they lose their little girl, but then they're suddenly in the spotlight, being scrutinized and judged by everyone.
Some of the sources even mention how people were criticizing the Warners for letting Lyanna walk to her friend's house alone. It's a reminder that in cases like this, people are quick to blame and speculate. It's easy to judge and second-guess decisions, but honestly, no parent should ever have to experience something like this.
Right. It's just heartbreaking to think about what they must have gone through.
Yeah.
And then there were those moments of false hope, like when investigators thought Joseph Duncan, that serial killer from Idaho, might have been involved. Can you imagine that emotional roller coaster for everyone?
Ugh. Yeah, false leads are just cruel. You get your hopes up, and then they're dashed again. It's a good reminder to be really careful with investigations and stick to the evidence.
One detail that I found really interesting was the story about that Barbie doll case. A few weeks before Lyanna disappeared, she came home with this Barbie, telling her parents that some little old lady had given it to her.
Wow, that's creepy. It's impossible to know for sure, but it makes you wonder if someone was trying to gain Liana's trust, maybe grooming her for something awful.
Yeah, it makes you think about how vulnerable kids are and how important it is to teach them about stranger danger and how to stay safe.
For sure, we tend to think these things only happen in big cities, in bad neighborhoods, but the truth is, it can happen anywhere, even in a nice, quiet town like Chisholm.
Right. And then there's Bruce Christensen, the guy who confessed to Leanna's murder and then led the police to a cat grave. What a terrible thing to do.
Yeah, what Christensen did was awful, and it also wasted so much time and resources. It just goes to show that sometimes people who say they have answers are really just out for themselves.
It's shocking what people will do for their own benefit. Even exploiting a tragedy like this,
Yeah.
it makes you realize that evil can be lurking anywhere.
And it shows how important it is to think critically and not just believe everything you hear. You have to be careful about the information you take in, especially in serious situations like this.
One thing I found both interesting and frustrating about this case is that there's no clear answer. Even after all these years, we still don't know for sure what happened to Lyanna.
It's true, and I think that's what makes this case so unsettling. We're left with more questions than answers, and it just feels so unfinished. It's like a reminder that sometimes, even when law enforcement and the community do everything they can, justice is still out of reach.
But even with all the uncertainty and the unanswered questions, there's still some hope, right? The Chisholm Police Department is still investigating any new leads that come in. They haven't given up on finding Lyanna, and that says a lot.
Definitely. It shows that they believe every case matters and every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed.
And even though it turned out to not be her, the fact that that young woman came forward thinking she might be Lyanna proves that she could still be out there somewhere. Maybe she just doesn't know who she really is.
It's a good point. Even when things seem hopeless, we shouldn't give up hope completely. There's always a chance, even a small one, that Lyanna's story could have a happy ending.
That's such an important thing to remember. Even in a case with so much sadness and despair, it's important to hold on to that little bit of hope. And even though we may never know for sure what happened to Lyanna, her story still matters. It reminds us to be better, to care for each other, and to believe that hope can last. It's amazing how resilient the people of Chisholm have been. I mean, they've been through so much with this case, all the trauma and unanswered questions, but they still come together as a community.
Oh, absolutely. You can really see that sense of community in the sources. From the very beginning, they were there for the Warners, and even now, they're still working to keep Lyanna's memory alive. It's really inspiring.
There's this one detail that I found particularly touching. Patty Wetterling, Jacob Wetterling's mother, reached out to the Warners after Lyanna disappeared.
Oh, wow.
She offered them support and guidance based on her own experience, because she had been through something similar.
That's so powerful to be able to use your own pain to help someone else through theirs. It really shows the depth of human compassion, especially in the face of such unimaginable loss.
It's a reminder that even when things are at their darkest, we can find strength and comfort in each other. And it also shows how these cases have a ripple effect. They impact so many people beyond just the immediate family and community.
Lyanna's case really sparked a national conversation about child safety. It forced people to think about how vulnerable kids are and how we need to be more aware of the dangers that are out there. And it made people realize that these horrible things can happen anywhere, even in places that seem safe.
Right, and while we've been focusing on Lyanna and her family, it's important to remember that the entire town of Chisholm was affected by this. This is a tragedy that will never be forgotten.
It's true. These kinds of cases can have a deep and lasting impact on a community. They can erode trust and create fear and just leave this sense of unease that can last for years, even decades.
So what can we learn from all of this? What can we do to prevent these tragedies from happening in the future?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to keep children safe. We need to be vigilant, we need to educate ourselves and our kids about potential dangers, and we need to create an environment where children feel comfortable speaking up if something seems wrong.
And it's also a reminder that community support is crucial, especially in times of crisis. We saw how the people of Chisholm rallied around the Warners and refused to give up hope. It's a testament to the power of human connection and collective action.
Absolutely. It's a powerful example of how strong the human spirit can be. Even in the face of such darkness, there's always that spark of hope and resilience.
Lyanna's story is a heartbreaking reminder that even in the most ordinary places, the unimaginable can happen. It's a story about loss, grief, and the power of hope. And it's a story that challenges us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more connected as a community.
It's a story that stays with you. If anything we talked about today resonated with you, share Lyanna's story with others. You never know, even the smallest actions can have a huge impact.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a listener's world of information. If you've got a stack of sources you'd like us to unpack, hit that subscribe button and let us know.